Okay, so we have 40 minutes for questions. Let me grab my glasses. Okay, so I'm gonna hop in the Q&A. Okay, Dana, should I start here with sensing lots of resonance with yin yoga?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Okay, so sensing lots of resonance with yin yoga. Do you have any experience with yin and the incorporation of some of these principles to it? That's so interesting. I don't actually. I think I I had the Paul Grilly Yin Yoga DVD from Pranamaya, and I remember doing it like 10 or 12 years ago, and uh, it wasn't my cup of tea. But I find it fascinating that you're finding lots of resonance with yin yoga. And I think that's wonderful because I don't consider taking like one class on a DVD 10 years ago to be experienced with yin yoga. So yeah, if you can, I think that would be really cool. Like maybe a yin yoga with somatics class. That sounds amazing. Um, yeah, I wish I knew more, but yeah. Would touch and pressure sensations be considered only proprioception and not interoception? Yeah, that's a really good question. And my intuition, and from what I do know, I would say yes, because my understanding of interoception is um, sensing what's happening inside of your body, meaning, hunger, thirst, breath, heart's pace, as opposed to proprioception and like what I have a chapter in my book called Sensory Feedback Methods. And, it's all about using balls and foam rollers, which I love. I used to always say, like, for a very long time, I taught a lot of self massage with therapy balls. And I would say to my students, this is my sneaky way to get you to do Feldenkrais and somatics, because the students felt like they were getting something done by rolling the ball, like, oh, I'm rolling out I'm ironing out my whatever muscle, which we know from the research is not what's happening. There's a lot of things that are happening. Like you're doing small, slow movements and you're getting feedback, say from a ball or a foam roller instead of the floor. So yeah, I think somatics, pressure from the floor is a wonderful tool for proprioception in the same way as like using a prop, like a ball or a foam roller or a block, as feedback and pressure is great. If you are naturally prone to stretching and low impact, is there a way to encourage those students to balance with strength and stability? Great question. I always say, and I'm sure you all know this trope, like you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And I found that I can say a lot, like, make sure, well, when I was teaching classes in real life for 10 years at Equinox before everything shut down, I was really grateful to teach at a gym because I would say, hey, welcome to my class. This is all about recovery and restoration. We're going to do hard, challenging things, but this is not your cardio. This is not your strength training. This is more in the, they had a category that they called was I don't think they called it recovery. They called it something like recovery. But anyways, but I would talk about like, this is not all you need, right? This is one thing you need, but like go downstairs and lift your weights and, go to the other floor and get your cardio in the Zumba class. And then I would also talk about how I did other things besides the calm stretching and somatics. And that's why I was healthy and pain-free. And that's really all you can do, I think. Yeah. I work with active seniors, mainly in their 80s. Is there a way to make somatics more accessible to those who feel uncomfortable lying on the ground? Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier. about how when I would go to Feldenkrais classes, many people that were older, like in their 80s and 90s, had somebody that would bring them there and help them get down onto the ground at the beginning of class and then help them get back up at the end. I think some of the places where I took Feldenkrais classes, there were some chairs for people who needed to get down, help getting down and up at the beginning and at the end of class. And in Feldenkrais classes, it's really common, I don't know what they're called, but they remind me of when I was a kid and would go camping. And you know how you pitch your tent and you've got your sleeping bag, but like we had these blankets that were kind of padded and we would put them on the ground underneath our sleeping bag. And so many Feldenkrais classes have those. And they're bulky and they're big and they're expensive, I think. You know, they're not like, oh, I'm just going to bring a few of these to my class. But they're great because it's like you just have a big padded area. So I hope that's helpful. I think when older folks are having trouble getting up and down off the ground, like that's a great opportunity to work with them privately and help them build up the strength and mobility to do that. And or maybe teach a specialized class or workshop. I have a class on Yoga International that's called Get Up, Stand Up. I love teaching classes that are all about getting up and down off of the ground. So yeah, but privates are always the best way I find to help people with special needs. You mentioned core training in Saturday morning session, the difference between teaching core activation by engaging transversus or abdominal bracing. Could you provide a resource with more information about this? Yes, that's the one where I can't remember the woman's name. I can picture the video, but you know, I wouldn't say she's the be all end all. Like there's tons of resources on this topic. The best thing to do is to Google hollowing versus bracing, which I believe I said that answering someone else's question, and you will just be treated to a like shopping mall of research articles to read. So again, the dumbed down version of it that I always say is bracing is for high loads and more exertion, and hollowing is for low loads and less exertion. How does yoga tune-up relate to somatic sequencing? So, you know, as far as yoga tune-up goes, I never know what people mean when they say yoga tune-up because, you know, do you mean like rolling on balls? Because Tune-Up Fitness Worldwide is a brand, and then within that brand, there's different modalities. So there's role model method, there's yoga tune-up method. So yeah, let me know if you could be a little more specific. I don't really like have any crossover between the two. I just take what I've learned from Hannah Somatics, Feldenkrais, and Bartenieff, which are all somatic modalities, and you know, insert them into a yoga class. Yes, green light, red light. Sorry, let me read the question. Do you ever design flows based on poses designed to correct the three reflexes, green light, red light, and trauma? I haven't yet, but I think that's a brilliant idea. So I didn't get into talking about that. That's covered in detail in Hannah Somatics, you know, trainings, but you can, of course, definitely do a Google search on the red light, green light reflexes, Hannah Somatics, and read all about it. I think that would be amazing. It's very similar to, say, I'll often sequence a class related to anterior and posterior oblique slings. So that's the work of Andre Vleeming. And there's also correlates to that with Tom Myers. So it's also, I think, fun to design a sequence like the lateral line flow. He's got a lateral, you know, it's how he decided to dissect the body along fascial lines. So, you know, there's like a deep front line, there's a spiral line, and yeah, there's all these different modalities that have come across the same thing, these connections, these meridians, the acupuncture points. So whether they call it like a chain or a line or, the reflex, yes, for sure. Like create a class around that. I think that's awesome. Intra-abdominal. Oh, thank you. It's Tracy Hansen. It's definitely Tracy, but I can't remember her last name. So that's why I would look it up. For some reason, like Scher, Sheher is coming to mind, but I'll find it in 2 seconds when I'm not trying to multitask and teach tonight and let you guys know. How much of the somatic back bend sequence would you typically include in a yoga practice? So again, I spoke to this earlier in terms of not doing a bait and switch, not having your students show up for a yoga class and expect yoga, and then suddenly you teach a full hour or hour and 15 minutes of somatics. Don't do that, right? So that's why I'm teaching these classes in this way. So if the class is an hour, maybe the first 10 minutes are somatics. Or if the class is an hour and 15 minutes, maybe the first 20 minutes is somatics. It doesn't have to be at the beginning. I tend to like to do that. But unless you're calling the class a somatics class, if you're calling it yoga, make sure that there's only a portion of the class that's somatics. Because students don't appreciate when they're showing up for something and you give them something completely different. So that's why I've structured it in this way. The somatics is always a small portion of the class and the rest is yoga, because I'm still calling the class yoga deconstructed. I'm not calling it come to my somatics class. Reminds me so much of Iyengar type practice. Is there a relationship? That's so interesting. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. So I was a fashion designer, jewelry designer, textile designer before this career. And, there were only so many ways to drape fabric around the body. And so whenever you thought you came up with something new, someone else had done it. So yeah, today's class, was very much about isolating joints. And, it was less of a flow and more, I would say, instructional didactic than, say, the morning class where it was flowy and I didn't give as many detailed cues. So, I took Iyengar classes for about a year, say 11 years ago. And I don't really think of what we did as Iyengar today, but the thing with Iyengar is it's like, I remember you study with one teacher and it'd be totally different. And then they go to India and they're like, Iyengar does it this way. So, right, these methods are all like constantly shifting and evolving. But if you found a similarity, I think that's great. What's a good resource for FRC specifically? You can just go to their website, which is the FRC stands for Functional Range Conditioning. And, you can search them on Instagram and YouTube. I definitely enjoyed the training, and I'm glad I took it about 3 years ago, and I'm glad because I like incorporating some FRC to my classes. Wonderful sequence. I missed why you were trying to pull the dowel apart. Yes, so I created a program for Equinox Worldwide and traveled around teaching for them. They're the group fitness instructors, a class that was called Best Stretch Ever. And we used a dowel. And it's basically what I love about the dowel is I think of it as FRC with a stick. So the same irradiation that we're doing when we're doing some of those FRC movements, which is the same irradiation intention you do in weight training. I find it easier and more accessible when I'm teaching a yoga class to tell people to pull the stick apart or try to shorten the stick or drive the stick into the ground, as opposed to, what I taught, which is totally doable, like squeeze the ball and let that tension from your fist irradiate through your forearm into your shoulder throughout your whole body. But everyone's different. You can use whatever props or tools you like to create that tension and irradiation. But yeah, when I teach dowel work. I have a class bundle that I just ran a sale on, and I go into great depth and detail on it. So I close the cart, but if you are interested, just reach out to me and I'll send you the link, and you can purchase those classes. They're really fun, and I find very illuminating ways to teach by using the dowel. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. All right. Did I miss anything? Yeah.
There's just another question in the chat box, if you don't mind.
Okay. No, not at all.
What might be the best relaxing somatic prep for restorative class?
Okay. Yeah. You know, it depends, of course, what restorative poses you're teaching. So if you were, and I used to teach restorative workshops and more restorative, but that was about 10 years ago. I haven't taught in a long time. But when I would teach, I would do different restorative poses. I wouldn't really have a theme. And so it wasn't focused or concentrated on, say, like restorative back bends, or restorative twists. I would do a little bit of everything in the restorative class. If you were doing it like that, like say if I'm teaching a regular yoga class and I do one restorative pose at the end, I guess it could go with the focus or theme of the class. But what I would encourage you to do is, I can't remember which PowerPoint slide, I put resources for YouTube videos. There's a PowerPoint, maybe it's in the next one. Yes, it's in the next one. And there's a guy named Alphonse, Alfons. And if you just go in the PowerPoint for tomorrow, you'll see the slide with the link. And then I also have, there's a woman named Sue. So he has tons of Feldenkrais sequences on his YouTube channel, and he's my favorite. So whenever I'm stressed out, a lot of times I just go to Alphonse. I turn on the YouTube. I have my favorite sequences that I do. For me, I tend to hold tension in my upper back, shoulders, and neck. So I tend to do more of those sequences of his, but he's got every body part sequence, everything. And so, yeah, I would think about like, what do your students need? You can't really go wrong because I think all of the somatic sequences are relaxing. It's just sort of what area of the body would you want to focus more on, and how long of a time span are you going to teach the somatics portion of your class versus the restorative portion? Yeah, so you could pick anything, from the pre-recorded stuff I've done, or, right, sky's the limit. Hop on YouTube and search for a sequence you like. Okay. I hear my AirPods kind of petering out. I see one new message. Thank you. Okay. You still there, Dana?
Yep, still here.
Okay.
So if there aren't any more questions, some couple just popped up.
Okay, yeah. What is a good source about somatic, I think that says efficiency on nerves? Efficacy, maybe? So off the top of my head, I don't really know. Effect. What is the effect of that? And when you say nerves, like when I think of nerve glides, that I absolutely love doing nerve glide stretches. So like one of the most famous nerve glides that a lot of PTs teach is this one. And I think it's the ulnar one. But when you do this, it looks silly, but you'll definitely, or I shouldn't say definitely, you might likely feel a stretch. And they call it, a nerve glide. I just listened to a whole podcast with Gregory Lehman and Adam Meekins about how they wish they wouldn't call nerve glides nerve glides. But, you know, whenever you are moving your body or stretching, you're stretching everything. You're stretching muscles and fascia and nerves and lymph and all of it. My husband is a musculoskeletal radiologist, and like he looks at CT scans, MRIs all day long, and X-rays. And so I don't think there's any research that I'm aware of on what effect somatics has on the nerves. You could certainly do a Google Scholar search, but I honestly don't know. But I can recommend doing a search on nerve glides. There's a lot of information on those, and there are simple movements that they call it like stretch your nerves, but again, it's if they feel good and they help, I'm all for it. Okay, some specific somatic sequence to help with anxiety, trauma, and grief. I'm teaching post-fire in my community, which was very impacted. Yeah, so again, I think this goes back to everyone is different. So when I, did psychotherapy from age 22 to, 46, it was one-on-one because my stress and anxiety and trauma was different from somebody else's. And so the therapist, makes it pertinent and applicable and helpful for me. So, with scope of practice, I always recommend, or refer out to a therapist for anxiety, trauma, and grief. With that being said, of course, what we do in the movement world and with interoception and somatics and yoga can help with that. So I just don't ever say like, this is going to help with this. Because it's prescriptive and diagnostic, and I kind of leave that to the clinicians who have, done their schooling and licensure to say that. So if you're working with somebody one-on-one, just like with physical therapy, I recommend clients of mine all the time to Aileen, who's local, who's a somatic psychotherapist, and then if they're okay with it, I would talk to her and say, because she's fluent in movement and all kinds of movement, what kind of movement would you recommend that I do with Sally? I'm just making up a name that you think would help with the work she's doing with you. So I'm a big fan of individualizing when it comes to any sort of specific diagnosis or condition. If it's a group class, a group class is a group class. So when I teach group classes and I want it to be relaxing, I usually pick something that I find relaxing or that other students of mine have found relaxing. It's never going to work for everybody. So, but that's why it's a group class. So yeah, I would just pick something that you think is relaxing and hope that it works, but we can't be all things to all people for all conditions. We can just offer up, an experience when it's a group class. Oh, funny looking nerve glide again. Yeah. So you bring your index fingers and thumb tips together, and then it's like, ooh, peekaboo. It's a big stretch. I was doing it so easily before. It's really funny looking, right? So it looks like this. And I think it's the ulnar nerve glide. That's the ulnar, that's the radial. But go on YouTube, put in nerve glides, and bam, there's thousands of videos. Okay. Oh, I used to call that Junior Birdman. I like it. Okay. Wait and see if anyone else has any questions. What are pales and rails? Great question. That comes from the FRC language. And gosh, I'm so bad at remembering exactly what it stands for. It's progressive. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to look it up because it's not memorized. I took the training so long ago. But all that it means is it's like a progressive angle or a regressive angle is off the top of my head what I remember. Feel free to chime in, anyone who like teaches all this stuff all the time and it's top of mind or tip of your tongue. But when we were pushing the top of our foot into the wall, I believe that's the progressive angle because you would be trying to straighten your knee. And then the rails is the regressive angle when you're trying to close the angle. They in FRC use a lot of fancy terminology that's used in other methods in a very simplistic way, like where they'll just say contract, relax, and you know you're contract relaxing the quads. Now we're contract relaxing the hamstrings. I appreciated all of the research that was presented in the FRC training, but I did find that the terminology they used, which happens a lot in movement modalities. If any of you are familiar with, say, like gyrotonic, I've done a lot of gyrotonic, and they use terms that like they'll call your fifth line, which is like basically means the sushumna, which means your spine, or they'll say seed center, which is kind of the same as like mula bandha or pelvic floor. And so a lot of these methodologies, you know, become very tribal and they have their own language, but it means the same thing as it means in like, say, general exercise science parlance or anatomical terminology. And so, yeah. Oh, Joelle, I was hoping you were there. Yes. Progressive, thank you, angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading. Thank you. And then you elaborated, I believe, about how their training protocols. Yes, cool. Designed to increase range of motion by combining strength and stretching. The intent is to get the brain to utilize as many motor units, oh, I love this, thank you, as possible to achieve a specific movement. IL stand for isometric loading. This is the strength part. Oh, thank you, Maud. I so appreciate it. Yeah, I would totally need my like FRC notes next to me to remember. It doesn't come out of my mouth off the top of my head. But yeah, great stuff to learn from FRC for sure, as well as I think I mentioned DNS, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, as far as goes developmental movement patterns. And those of you that are super curious about all the bracing versus hollowing, highly recommend DNS. They talk all about intra-abdominal pressure and lots of research on why you would brace rather than hollow. So yeah, definitely recommend that training. Fifth line from Gyrotonic. I love gyro. What other terms did you compare that to? You know, you'll probably know better than me. As I've taken years of Gyrotonic private lessons, but I never taken any trainings. So this is just cueing I would hear in private lessons. I would take some group classes too, Gyrotonic tower classes. And my understanding is when Julia Horvath created Gyrotonic by mixing together Kundalini with like 3D apparatus-based Pilates. So a lot of the energetic cues that he uses, from my understanding for gyro, comes from Kundalini. And so, yeah, my understanding is the fifth line is basically like the Sushumna in yoga language, but I could be wrong. Okay, we'll wait and see if there's any other questions. Especially like if there's any questions you asked in the Facebook group. I have not had a moment to look there. I'll definitely, check everything out that's happening over there on Monday. It's just hard to do that right now on prepping to teach. So if any of you asked me a question over there and you want to put it here, feel free. Confused about how irradiation helps. Great question. Is it like pandiculation in that you're going through a range of motion with global tension? So I did a social media post about irradiation where like I really researched it and wrote out the caption in a way that was correct. So this is going to be going off the top of my head explaining. But and there's a lot of controversy too over the person that supposedly invented it or came up with it. Anyways, long story short is if you are trying to create tension and contraction in a very specific area of your body, it is much easier to do that if you irradiate, meaning if you tense everywhere else in your body. So for example, before I started doing strength training and weightlifting, I always did weightlifting on my own at the gym. But before I trained with like a coach who was a power lifter, I don't power lift by the way, but like, somebody who's super smart and like has done all the trainings and all the things. I didn't realize like I would just impart my Pilates knowledge on my weightlifting. So when I would do chest press or bench press, I would do neutral spine, neutral pelvis, just like we do in Pilates or in physical therapy corrective exercise. And so it was mostly a chest exercise. And then what I learned from going into the strength and conditioning world and training with a personal trainer is that it's actually a full body exercise. So say when you're doing a bench press, you're actually in spinal extension and you're pushing your feet into the ground. You're tensing your whole body everywhere in order to push the bar up, as opposed to, just kind of, making sure you're not doing cat cow and moving your arms. It's hard to explain until you experience it, but the same thing applies to, say, a deadlift, right? So there's this idea, at least for me, from Pilates, was like, oh, it's just neutral pelvis, neutral spine, and then you pick up the bar and you stand up. But in order to actually increase the load, you have to, like at a low weight, no problem. But as soon as you start going heavy, you have to create the intra-abdominal pressure, which is often called a Valsalva. It is bearing down, and then you are tensing your entire body everywhere, which for somebody who's hypermobile and comes from yoga land is like a completely foreign concept and feels so uncomfortable and strange and awful until your nervous system adapts to it. So I love how FRC is kind of bringing this global tension that you would learn in strength and conditioning to mobility work, because I think at least if you start with the irradiation in your mobility work, then when you go to doing it with weightlifting, it's not so foreign. As far as how it relates to pandiculation, when I think of pandiculation, it's like, yeah, I'm tensing, but it feels really good. Whereas with the irradiation, it's like, I am tensing everywhere and it's super uncomfortable and it's exhausting. And sometimes when I'm done, I feel a little dizzy. So that's how I would define from a feeling, sensing, embodied way the difference between pandiculation and irradiation are creating global tension.
Trina, just to let you know.
Anything else? We still have about 8 minutes.
So Trina, just as an FYI, your AirPods went out. So if there's another question, we'll have to mute you and switch you over to the other audio.
Yeah, and Dana, I actually can't hear you because my AirPods died. Okay.
There we go.
Let's see if I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
I just hear you very faintly coming through my phone because my AirPods are dead, so I'm not getting sound from my phone. Should I?
Go ahead and switch. It's switched. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're switched now.
Oh, you know what? If I turn the volume up on my laptop, will I hear you through my laptop? No.
Hear me?
Hear me? Ah, now I can hear you. Yes, because I had the volume down on my laptop. Yeah. So should I wrap it up and say goodbye, or are we staying on a little longer?
I think if all the questions are answered, we can wrap. Well, another one just popped up.
Yeah, there we go. You had mentioned you did physical therapy a while back for not being able to bear weight in 4-point kneeling. That's a common problem with my clients. Wrist can't bear weight. Any insight you can share into how you regained that mobility and strength? Yes, progressive loading. So this is a common problem with my clients as well. And I must say that I've always seen my clients at a Pilates studio with equipment. And so the strengthening that they would get would be on the equipment, or of course I would teach them, somatics and yoga on a mat, Pilates on a mat. When the pandemic hit, the best thing that ever happened to all of my clients is that they couldn't see me at the Pilates studio, and I told them they needed to buy dumbbells and kettlebells. And all of my clients, some of them have been with me for 8 or 9 years, are now the ones who couldn't do 4-point kneeling are now doing, 3 sets of 10 overhead press with a 15-pound weight. They're doing, supine chest press with dumbbells and kettlebells. And the reason why they've progressed is because of the dumbbells and kettlebells. So it's really simple. It's just people won't do it. But when you think about it, right, if you're in 4-point kneeling, there's load in your hands, wrists, arms, and shoulders. In wrist extension, it's a set load. When you lift weights, your wrists are in neutral and you are lying on your back. And you're strengthening your chest and your shoulders and your arms and your forearms and your wrists, because you have to balance the weight, especially if it's kettlebell. And you can start with 5-pound weights and then work your way up. So that's exactly how I did it. That's how I've been successful with my clients. It is boring, but it is worthwhile. And what I would say is, what I learned from working with the personal trainer his name's Andrew, for about 3 years, is, you have to progressively load. So, we would do 3 sets of 10 with, say a 10-pound weight. And then, when that was easy, we went up to 12 pounds, and then maybe I did 8 reps. And then when that was easy, we stuck with the 12, but we went to maybe 15 reps. So you have to chart it and keep track of the reps, the weights, and the number of sets, and be really consistent with the progression, which means they have to be consistent with showing up and doing it. And that's really how simple it is. It's just, the progress happens really fast. It's getting them to progress. And I think what got my clients on board is them seeing my success and being like, wait, weren't you the one with the shoulder and wrist that always hurt? And now you're doing push-ups and pull-ups and all these things. And they knew that I got from, there to there by progressively loading with external weight, like dumbbells and kettlebells. Spring resistance on the Pilates equipment is great. It's better than nothing. Stretchy bands are great. It's better than nothing. But the best way to get there is especially bottoms up with a kettlebell. So that's where you hold the kettlebell, and normally the bell rests here, but you balance it up here, and that perturbation forces your forearms and wrists to really strengthen under load. It also works the rotator cuff muscles. So I hope that is helpful. Either learn some of that on your own, like I did with a personal trainer, or take a course. It's the perfect time to get your clients to do this stuff because, I just tell them we do it either at the park or on Zoom, and they have the weights at home, or I bring the weights to the park. And the progress has been like astronomical. So yeah, I hope that inspires you and gives you hope. It's easy. It's just, you have to do that. All right. So it's just 1 minute till. So I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining me today and yesterday, or watching the replay if that's what you're doing. Thank you so much to everyone at Yoga International for all of it. Everything. And if it is nighttime for you, have a wonderful night's sleep, and we will wrap up tomorrow with the 4th and final session. So I will see you then.